Good afternoon, everybody. God dear, Tim asked me would I come and give a 30-year perspective on business intelligence, and it made me think a little bit. 30 years, yes, actually it's over 30 years since I joined the company, which in those days was British Gas. So let's have a look at what we're going to run through. We'll give a little bit of background. Hopefully most of you will know National Grid. For those of you who don't, we'll give a little bit of background to it. A little bit about me, and then I've got a set of topics for you. I'll flash them up, and I think what we'll do is we'll go straight into it. I think you might guess what some of them are, some of them perhaps you might not. So let's go. National Grid, we are an international electricity and gas company. We operate in both the UK and in the USA, one of the world's largest investor-owned energy companies. In the UK, we run something like 7,000 kilometres of overhead lines. Those are those big tower or pylon things with all the wires strung over them, and about 700 kilometres of underground cables. We also own and operate we own and operate those overhead lines in England and Wales, and then we manage the electricity system across the whole of Great Britain. We also have something like 7,500 kilometres of underground high-pressure gas mains that distributes gas around the country. And then we have a further, excuse me, I'll just check the statistic to make sure I got it right, 132,000 kilometres of low-pressure gas pipeline that take gas into the homes of about half of the population of the UK. Very much like the last speaker, efficiency, reliability and safety are critical to us, and as an organisation we're very much committed to safeguarding the environment and handing it over to the future in a good shape. So, me. Well, I've worked in gas and electric. My origin was in the gas industry for over 30 years. When I started, Microsoft was in shorts. I think they were 7 years old. I think in 1982 they were about to launch something that they call Windows on an unsuspecting world. The verb to Google wouldn't be invented for another 20 to 25 years. Tim Berners-Lee, it would be another 10 years before he came up with the World Wide Web, and it would be 10 years before the first text message was sent, because of course mobile phones didn't exist at all in those days. One of the great things I do remember though was there was no such thing as email. So despite what I did every day, my email inbox never got full because it didn't exist. Now, for the first 5 years, I actually worked as a research physicist, and I worked on liquefied natural gas storage safety, and a lot of the work I did was analytical work, looking at modelling what would happen if we ever had a failure on a storage site. I suppose you could say it was a waste of time, because luckily we've never had a failure, so they never needed my work. But then for the last 26 years, I've worked in a variety of technical, strategy and management roles within a successive IS departments of both the gas business and then latterly the combined gas and electricity business. The following examples are taken from my time, and as I say at the bottom, where relevant, I will seek to protect the identities of the innocent. So, let's go. I solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. We've already had the phrase today, yeah, single version of the truth. So, post-year 2000 project, so we're about 13 years ago. We're coming out of year 2000 where we all said it was going to be Armageddon, and of course it wasn't. And I think this was one of the examples of a CIO that went to a conference, and there was a great idea that said, well, why don't you put a program in, and why don't you answer all those questions across your company for once and for all, and have a single version of the truth for everything. All your stats for your annual report, everything, we could do everything in one go. Sounds a great idea. So, where do we start? Well, we chose an easy subject. Let's deal with people. That's nice and easy, isn't it? You know, how many people work for us? Okay, so what do you mean by people? Full-time? Part-time? What do you mean by work for us? Do you mean permanent employees? Do you mean temporary employees? Do you mean contractors? Do you mean agencies? What do you actually mean? This easy question was rapidly becoming rather complicated. And of course, what's the context of the question? You might want to know how many people you've got on your payroll. You might want to know how to size the canteen in the office, because there's the number of people that use the canteen. You might want to size the car park for the number of people that are going to park. Those days, we still had car parks, by the way, you could actually drive to work, so...
and 2040.
So, the key thing about it was we rapidly found that actually this easy question was anything but easy. It was actually an incredibly difficult question, but we hadn't realised it when we set off. It was actually probably about the most difficult thing we could have chosen. And indeed, as we began to try and get answers to some of those, sorry, I must remember to stand still for the camera here. As we began to get answers to those, we actually realised the data maintenance processes behind it didn't really exist. What were our starter, lever, mover processes? How did we know when people had started for the company? How did we know when somebody in the company had led a service contract and we'd actually got people that would then be coming onto our site to do things? So actually, we couldn't maintain the data, even if we knew the answers to the first set of questions we asked ourselves. So, as it said at the bottom, the ice element was the easy bit. Actually gaining the business agreement about the data definitions, understanding the robustness of the data sources were far, far more difficult. And it was something that we really did underestimate. And really, it's where we should have started. We shouldn't have started with what we thought was the IT, we actually should have started with our business. So we started from completely the wrong place. Now the reference at the bottom, don't forget the turkeys. One of the other areas that we started looking at was a very complex engineering area, where we actually employed a couple of people to do very, very complex analyses for us, to then give us data that we could then make decisions on. Now, when we turned up as IS saying, well actually we want to automate this and we want to put all your knowledge into a computer system, what do you think was going to happen to their job? So do you think they were really keen to help us? I don't think so. Turkeys don't usually vote for Christmas. By the way, I'm happy to take questions as we go, so please, if you've got a question, just indicate and we'll take it as we go. So, I'm not paying for that. So we're actually dropping back in time now. We're going back to the late 1980s. Has anybody in the room got an IBM mainframe still? No? They've all gone, have they? They're gone with the dinosaurs. Well, late 1980s, in fact, I spoke to somebody when I came in and he mentioned a company that I haven't heard in a long, long time, Sperry Univac. And in the mid-1980s, the part of the company I worked for, East Midlands region, was running a Sperry Univac system. And as part of a drive for the company, we were migrating onto an IBM mainframe. IBM mainframes were expensive, seriously expensive pieces of kit. So one of the things that we had with that was that we rebuilt the time. We operated it a bit like a bureau. If you go back to the 70s for computing bureaus, you would actually buy an amount of time on it and then you get a bill for the time. So we had to rebuild it. Now one of the new things that came in that we experimented with was an end-user computing environment. And initially we ran two services on the end-user computing environment. One of them was a newfangled means of communication that was actually going to save us all time. It was called email. So we ran the IBM Prof system. The other was that we actually had an end-user query environment for the customer services department. So they could actually make some queries themselves on the customer services data and they could come to conclusions from that data. So, one day the customer services manager, a guy called Dave Halsey, comes to see me and says, Derek, I'm not paying the bill, mate. I know it's wooden dollars, but there is no way I'm paying for that newfangled email. It is dreadfully, awfully expensive. I can't afford it. Oh dear, I said. I'll have to see what I can do on that one. I really don't understand it. So I went away and I got one of the lads to dig into what the data was, and surprise, surprise, it wasn't the email system. No, what it was actually his guys were running, I think the thing was called file tab. They were running multiple file tabs against the copy of the database. And the one thing about the IBM mainframe, it was very, very good at using all its time. You could actually, in fact, you should load an IBM mainframe up to be 100% utilised. So when you got any spare time, it used it to run the file tab queries. And of course, then when we accumulated the accounting records and the charging records, it cost him a fortune. So we made some changes to the configuration that stopped his staff running multiple queries at the same time. They weren't so keen on it. They had to think a bit more about it, but then actually his rebilling charges went down. Unfortunately, email stayed. So I think the lesson on that is really not to underestimate the desire for information. Hardware in the intervening years has become really, really cheap. But of course what we're doing now is actually, as cloud is coming in, we're actually going back to the generation of the 1970s. We're going back to bureau services and we're buying bureau services. So just a word of caution on that, to think about it. Have we got all the controls in place to make sure that we don't get runaway charges? Because the modern version of file tab, somebody's submitting the query from hell and then they're coming back with a very large bill. So, food for thought. 20 million. UK gas deregulation. This was the time that I actually met Tim for the first time. So we're forward now into early mid-1990s. Up until that stage, British Gas was a complete monopoly supplier and operator of gas in the UK. So we ran the pipelines, we bought all the gas, we brought it into the country, we sold it to you, we sold you the cookers and fires, we serviced them, we did everything. And the regulator, going into the early 1990s, broke that regime up. So for the first time it introduced competition in supply, and for the first time it actually put together what became Transco, which was actually the operation, the transmission network of actually transporting gas throughout the country. In many ways it was a brand new business. We'd had 12 regional engineering divisions that operated the pipelines, but they didn't run it as a business. It was just a means to actually get gas from wherever it came from in the North Sea to actually get it into your cooker without it floating away. But for the first time with the regulator, we actually had a business to run. So, for the first time, 20 million consumers in the UK could choose their gas supplier. Now, fortunately, it didn't go 0 to 20 in one instance. I think it started, I think the initial was 95, something like that. We started with 500,000 consumers. So these were new computer systems that we put in place, and we had 500,000 consumers. A month later, it was doubled to 1 million. I think a year later, it went to 2.5 million, and by just on 2 years later, we were up to 20 million consumers. So the system grew 40-fold in about 2 to 3 years. That stressed anything the market could bring to us. I think it's up there, at the time it was believed to be the largest Oracle database in Europe. We went out to the States, we talked to Ernst & Young and asked their guidance on how could we actually build something like this. They didn't really know. They couldn't actually offer us a great deal. If you actually know anything about the utility model in the States, it historically was predominantly city-gate based. So actually it's a smaller utility model than we are in the UK, quite bizarrely, but we got no references that we could come up with. So at the time we were actually shipping hardware in from our hardware partners, and we were shipping in, as the new models came out, we were shipping in the first serial numbers. We were so desperate for computing power to be able to get this thing to run. So one of the things, we built the transactional systems, and absolutely consistent with the model in terms of extract transform layers and all the rest of that kind of stuff. But one of the things we needed was we needed a reporting capability. The production system couldn't take the load. There was no way. It was struggling to deal with the transaction load. 24-hour batch jobs, when we first ran them, they kind of took a week. You had to tune them to get them down to 23 hours and then continually keep them going. Seeing lots of nods around the room there. So we had to build an add-on database, an operational data store that we used on that. And that extracted a copy of the day's data every night and was refreshed again the next night. We used business objects as the front end, a little French company that was almost a startup, I think, in those days that we came across, not the SAP monster that it is today, but we used business objects for the first time to build all our querying capability on the front end. And we superseded the system in 2011. It had a couple of facelifts along the way, but by and large, this capability remained the same for what was nearly 15 years. Now, I've pinched something actually from a colleague's presentation here, and I'll see if I can pick up whether the stats were on there. No, don't worry about it. I think the system is now up to about 22 million points on it. There's 10 years historical data stored in the main transactional system that then can be queried through the ODS front end on it. I think there's something like 3 billion items of data in there relating to the UK gas network. This is a critical system for it. It is the one place that knows who provides gas to whom throughout the UK. So if you swap your gas provider, and I think there's, was it 250,000 people a year? I might be wrong on that statistic, that swap. This is what sits behind it, and this is what enables it all to happen. I think the lesson for me there was that if the goal's clear enough, if the prize is big enough, you can do anything. This was an absolute monster. Real monster. I don't think any of us had any idea how big it was going to be. But actually, because of the drive, because of the people that were involved, we had a number of suppliers involved working with us to make this a reality, then we were able to deliver it. Does anybody ever read Computer Weekly and Computing? Yeah. Did anybody read that during the 1990s? Does anybody remember the headlines that always used to be in there? I don't know why I remember it, but I do. Wessex Area Health Authority. Every few weeks or a few months they were in there because they got a failed IT project. To me, one of the big successes of this is we never had a headline in Computing and Computer Weekly. So, Lego Aurora Qatar. What's this one about? Okay, this is talking about one of our businesses that actually imports liquefied natural gas into the UK. We have a terminal based in Kent, the Isle of Grain, and we have the capacity there to import up to 20% of the gas used in the UK. So it's a critical installation for us. Very, very important to us as a company, and very important to us in the room that actually use gas. So when we built the facility, we introduced a Honeywell control system. So the day-to-day operation, the safe operation of the facility, runs under the control of the Honeywell system. So we haven't got to send people out around the site to do things. It is all centralised and it's run through a central control system. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to gain access to a lot of the data that was in that system. So that actually we could analyse things, we could make decisions on that, we could understand more about the way that the plant was operating. So we went to Honeywell in this particular instance, and this is the Lego, and we bought their production historian database, PhD. Now that came as a plugin. So it doesn't interfere with the priorities of a real-time control system. We didn't have to build any extract and transform layer that went with it. We just bought it. And it came with a set of add-ons. It comes with something called, I think it's Uniformance, which is a desktop reporting suite, that we could build a set of dashboards that the terminal manager, at the terminal manager's morning session and their monthly management, they can see a dashboard there of how the terminal is operating. They can see whether we're meeting our commercial targets, because this is a commercial business. It's not regulated. It is a commercial business, although it's a wholly owned subsidiary of the group. So the whole lot came as a plug-and-play, pre-integrated Lego solution. It also has got a decision support capability we've been using recently. One of the recent investments we've made there is that we bring in waste hot water from the power station next door. It's a Neon CCGT power station recently gone live. So we take their waste hot water and use that to heat up our customers' liquefied natural gas, and then we return cold water back to them. So they don't have to pay for cooling water and pay the carbon penalties. We don't have to pay for using gas to heat things up. So it's a superb thing for us. But one of the elements around there was we needed a decision support capability using a lot of the data that was actually coming out of our control system. So we use the add-on tools that come from Honeywell to help us make those decisions. Now the alternative is that actually in origami, out of a piece of paper, you can make virtually anything you want. I think I can just about make a paper dart, but I've seen people make wonderful things, and you can make virtually anything you like out of a piece of paper, providing you've got the skill. So what we're going to look here is two systems, GIN and GSIS, which are the commercial systems that actually support the same site. GIN is the grain inventory nomination system. For a long time, yes, we did actually have another system that supported it. Anybody know what it's called? Yeah, we called it Tonic. Yeah, we had GIN and Tonic. So basically, GIN is a third-party transaction system, net-based, so our customers actually make the nominations for gas flows in and out of the terminal, bringing ships in and all that kind of stuff. So it's a day-to-day transaction system. But as we went into the phase 2 expansion of the terminal in 2008, there was a strong desire for us to be able to provide management information, business intelligence, call it what you will, out to our customers. So we built an add-on reporting system. The third party themselves didn't have the capability. We actually went out with a commercial tender. They didn't have something they could offer to us, so we ended up building something. We actually reused an internal development. It's internal development that actually provides reports onto our website that you can go onto and look at the state of the gas flows today. You can look at terminal availability and all sorts of things on there. So, from an IT point of view, we reused code, so that was a good thing. But of course, how do you keep the interface up to date? It's a separately designed interface. It's two companies that we've got to deal with. And of course, you know whose fault it is when it goes wrong. It's his fault, isn't it? All the time, you've got an interface there, you've got to manage across the interface. What happens when the data gets out of date if we've got to actually patch the data in the production system? Was actually the interface designed in such a way that it would actually bring the data across the interface and it would repopulate? Do our customers understand that? That actually we can go and change the data after the event because actually we patched the production system? How do we make sure that the data is flowing on a day-to-day basis? We've got to manage the roadmap in a way that from Honeywell, they manage it for us. They release the next version of the software, we implement it, of course we pay them for it, but they take care of things like that for us. Whereas in this instance, we had to deliver. We had to develop it ourselves, we've got to manage it ourselves. So we've got to manage the roadmap going forward, we've got to continually develop. So I think the lesson for me is both of these routes do work. And they do work successfully. But if you can, I'd take the Lego route. It's an awful lot less effort than designing and building it yourself and maintaining it yourself. So, two nations separated by a common language. Yeah? Do you walk on the pavement when you're in America?
Sidewalk.
The sidewalk, thank you. Yeah, the pavement, I believe, it's the road surface.
That's right.
So walking on the pavement in the US is not a good idea. So what this example is all about is where we end up confusion because people thought they were saying the same thing. So, we've already talked earlier on about utilities and the way in which we manage our assets. National Grid has a massive asset base. If we can if we can manage those assets slightly more efficiently, we can bring our costs down, and the value to us as a business is enormous. So, one of the techniques that I want to talk about here is condition-based maintenance. So it's understanding the condition of the asset, and then it's making decisions based on that information. Talking to somebody earlier, we were saying that what's happening now is we're getting intelligent assets. Whereas at one time we'd have run with valves and things, pneumatic lines that would trigger something to happen, and you got very little information about what it was doing. Today, you've got IT being built into those control systems. They've got massive volumes of information in them that if we can tap into, we can make decisions on. So we don't need to send somebody out to check the oil glass on a transformer to see if it's still got the right oil level on it. No, the control system for the transformer will actually tell us if the oil is high or low. Actually, it will also tell us what the condition of the oil is. Is the oil actually degrading? So there's a massive volume of information available or becoming available in assets that actually we can make use of. So in this particular example, what we wanted to do was actually gain access to that information. So one of our businesses, on a relatively small scale, we started off down this route of saying, okay, what we want to do is we want to take the control team and we want to take the asset team and we want to work out how to take data from the control system into the asset system. And there were three types of data that we wanted to gain access to. We want to gain access to operation stats. How long's the thing been running for? Yeah. How full is the oil? We want to gain condition. So might be the condition of the oil that we're looking at. And we wanted to gain access to alarms. So alarm triggers that might come through that might say, well, actually, you need to go send somebody out and go and have a look at it. Because it's alarming, maybe saying that the oil level's too low or whatever. So there was three bits of data that we wanted to do. So we had a series of workshops, and we spent quite a few weeks about this, with the two teams sat in the workshop together, and yep, they all nodded sagely and they were all talking the same language. So everything was great. We knew what data we wanted to take out of the control system and how we were going to stick it into the asset system. That was great. Were they talking the same language, or was one saying bow and the other was saying bow, but they were two different words? Well, actually, yes, they were. Give you the examples there of the kind of things that they were doing. First of all, do both systems have asset tags? So actually, we've got a common key. Yep, both got asset tags. No problem at all with asset tags. Okay, that's fine. Are they the same asset tags? Well, actually, they weren't. The control system treated every aspect of an asset as being a different tag. So the level of the oil in a pump, say, on a transformer, had a tag associated with it in the control system. The temperature sensor in there had a tag associated with it on the control system, because that was how the control system worked. But as far as the asset management system was concerned, a pump was a pump, or a transformer. You know, the core transformer would be a transformer. So actually, there was no correlation between the tags. In fact, it was multi-tags down to a single tag in many instances. So it was a multi-to-one configuration, and actually they were different tags. So the mapping between them didn't exist. We had to actually go back and create it. So in the asset system, we had to end up with a set of alternate tags that we could actually use in order to get the correlation. Operational condition data. The record that came across from the control system gave relative running hours. How many hours it's run since you last asked me. Of course, what the asset system wanted is it wanted absolute running hours. This thing has been running for X hours, therefore the rules are I will go and inspect it. You know, a bit like your car in terms of the control system on your car that will, you know, keep monitor of how many miles you've done and whatever, and then tell you that you need servicing. So we had, although we thought we were talking about the same thing, we weren't. We were talking about subtle differences, but differences that actually created a lot of problems. And one of the big things in here from an IT point of view was we didn't think we needed a transformation layer. We thought we could just take the data out of one and pass it straight into the other. And actually we had to put a transformation and interpretation layer in between the two in order to get the data out of one into the other. Now it is all sorted. You know, actually that is now working, and we're now learning from that data how we can manage our assets more efficiently. But at the outset, we were speaking two different languages because there were two teams that had different purposes, spoke at different timescales for different directions. Even though they sat by each other in the office, they spoke different languages. So be aware of that and be absolutely sure that you are speaking the same language. Slips, trips and falls. We've already had safety mentioned. For an organisation like us, safety is extremely important. It's very much a priority. If you read our annual report, it's right up there at the front page is where are we? It is important. And let's face it, if you're working with 400,000 volts, if you're working with 90 bar pressure, high pressure transmission systems, yeah, you pretty much hope that safety would be a priority for us. And anybody in the room familiar with the DuPont triangle? Yeah? So a safety triangle that very much says that the way that you start dealing at the bottom with hazards, and then I think you build up from hazards to near misses, then you build up to injuries, lost time injuries. Actually, if the base is wide enough, then you end up with some nasty stats that get to the top. So the idea of it is to manage the base, and then you actually never get to the tip of the triangle, and you never get serious injuries or worse. So it's something as an organisation that we're very, very familiar with. The safety journey we've had is we didn't have a bad start, but actually in the last few years we've really improved. But one of the things that we started to do was collect data about something we call effective safety discussions. This is all about observing people's behaviour or their actions and then actually discussing those actions with them. So the person that perhaps walks downstairs and they're on the phone holding a cup of coffee with a stack of books under their arm like that, you know, is that really the safest thing that you ought to do? Could you have actually used the lift or done it differently? The person that we know that always drives at 100 odd miles an hour down the road, nobody in the office will actually go with them because they all know they're a bad driver, but does anybody ever say anything to them? So very much around the whole idea was to try and begin to capture data about these conversations to put that into our main incident recording system, and then to start to get some trends around what's important. Now, working in an IS department, I used to have a safety qualification for actually going out onto substations, but I no longer go out to those, so that has actually lapsed. But working in an IS department, we tend to live in nice offices and rooms like this, where I've got to watch that I don't trip over the cable, but short of that, it's a pretty pleasant working environment. So trying to make safety real for the people that live in an office and trying to get them to pay attention to it is really difficult. But one of the things that we found here when we started putting the things together, so yeah, as it says there, relatively safe. If you compare us to somebody working on live overhead lines, they're people that dangle out of helicopters and actually work on the 400,000 volt line whilst it's live, then the perception is that in the office we're pretty safe. But as we started pulling the data out of it, we started looking at where's the discussion of the main business. Is it about the fact that if you get within 3.1 metres of a 400 kV line it will arc? Yeah? No, it wasn't. It was slips, trips and falls. That's where the focus of our operational business was. Just the same as actually the hazards that we're exposed to in the office. So in terms of being able to communicate to our business and to show to our colleagues what are the things that are concern in what was perceived as a hazardous environment, it was exactly the same as we had in the office. I think according to ROSPA, on average at the moment, the 3 people die every day in the UK falling downstairs. Falling downstairs, walking down the side of a 50-metre high liquefied natural gas storage tank, or falling down the stairs in our offices, where I think the floors are about 4 metres, it'll hurt just the same on both of them. 5 people in the UK die every day in road traffic accidents. Many of you will have driven at least part of the journey today. Personally, I drive a lot with my job. So do most of my colleagues. We spend time with our business is distributed around the country, so we spend time driving. So actually we're exposed to the same risks and issues as our colleagues on that one. So some of it will make some of us question what we're doing, question the way we behave, and potentially change our behaviour. So I think the lesson on there is collecting and collating data is great, but real, pithy, insightful feedback is priceless. Big or small. So, perennial discussion. Should we stick everything in an enterprise data warehouse, or should we be looking at multiple data marts? Well, I don't think there's a right answer. I think it really does depend what it is you're trying to solve. Personally, I do like local data marts, and I'll emphasise that as a personal view on it. I think it engenders local ownership. It is more flexible, more resilient to change. If you put everything together in a big central data mart, then you've got a central data warehouse, you've got a problem changing it, because different people will want different things out of it. If you've got it distributed and it's under local control, you can do more of what you want with it. Typically lower cost. Small systems cost less per head than major systems. And you have got the ability to exploit vendor-provided solutions, as with the Honeywell PhD example. If we tried to put that into a main enterprise data warehouse, that would have been an awful lot of work. In all probability, we'd have put PhD in as the extract mechanism to then interface it into an enterprise data warehouse. Against that, of course, you've got very limited ability to report across your enterprise. I know a lot of the vendors will say, yeah, you can plug across multiple data marts and all the rest of that, but you are, to an extent, limited.
Yeah. Question. Instead of looking big or small, how's that both?
I think you do end up with both, yes. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think the key thing, the bottom point there is that you do end up with potential solution duplication. If you've got lots of different tools, lots of different technologies that don't interoperate with each other, the IS department has to maintain them. I think the bottom line is understand what you're trying to do. In the right circumstances, enterprise data warehouses are absolutely the right answer. In others, go with the smaller data mart, and absolutely, it's not one size fits all. You could end up with both. Absolutely. Who wants to be a millionaire? Now, when Tim asked me the question, I got some examples myself, but I did think that one of the things that was sensible was that I actually tried to consult elsewhere. So I did ask a friend. So my friend Ian, who worked on a major BI initiative with our work and asset management electricity business, and there's just a few thoughts from Ian. The first one was it's very easy to get overexcited with these projects. Yeah, dream up all sorts of reports that we never use. We need strong change control and robust challenge. Sort out your data model early, then incrementally build it. Absolutely critical. Understand your data model, but then start to add things incrementally into it. Don't try and do everything at once. Strong business engagement. No hobbyists, please. We really know what is it that you absolutely want. Look for requirements that manage real risks, real deliverable efficiency opportunity. Not, as in one of the examples I used earlier, where we just had a great idea that we were going to solve BI reporting for the company forever. Data quality is essential, and I must admit, I really, really agree with this point. Data cleansing is of no use whatsoever until you have a mechanism to maintain it. A number of times I've seen data cleansing activities only for a couple of years later for there to be another data cleansing activity, because actually we couldn't maintain the data. And as you said at the bottom, it'll always take 3 times longer than you think it is, however long you think it may be. Seeing it's Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, I took another option here and actually asked the audience with a colleague, David. So what's the investment case for business intelligence? Externally, it can be around the way that you deal with your customers. So the example I gave earlier with the GSIS system was all about the way that we interacted with new customers and the experience that we wanted to provide them with working with us rather than working with another LNG terminal. So I can very much understand the case around providing information externally. But internally, it's often a leap of faith. If you understand more about your business, you will be more efficient. How many finance directors will buy into that? Yeah? In my experience, the former is difficult to deny, but the latter can be equally difficult to justify. Yeah? Finance directors don't like faith investments. So, how do you measure understanding? What's the track record of BI? I'd suggest to all of you that the track record of BI is mixed. There are some great successes, but there are also some... Absolutely, yeah. It can be very expensive, and one of the things on it is you may never get a return on investment. We may find that we analyse the way in which we manage our assets, and we may find, having spent a lot of money, that actually the way we currently do it is actually good enough. Now, there is value in knowing that, absolutely, but how much money do you associate with that value? And of course, when budgets come under pressure, BI is an easy target. So we had a business where we were transforming the complete IT capability in there, putting all new systems in, fit for purpose for the business that it was. One of the streams was going to be BI. When the project came under pressure, what do you think was the thing that went? It was BI. So, conclusion. Hopefully we're about okay on time. I hope you found it interesting, and I hope that you learned something. To my knowledge, National Grid and its predecessors have invested in business intelligence projects of many sorts over the last 30 years. We've had some major successes. But like a lot of other companies, some of them haven't quite turned out the way that we expected to when we set off. It can provoke strong reactions, no doubt about it. It can provide great value and stunning insights, but equally it can be very expensive and it can fail to deliver on its promise. So I suggest that the key skill for a BI practitioner is identifying the former and avoiding the latter. So, on that note, thank you. Any questions? Apologies for jumping around in front of the camera.
That's all right. Exactly. Right, questions for Derek.
Quick one.
Yeah.
Maybe quite a long one, but there's a perception generally of having one single view of the whole thing, as in one either enterprise system or only one source of information is the best way to go. I've sort of started to come to a bit of a conclusion myself. Actually, it's actually quite often a good thing to have a conflict between systems. I don't know if you've seen that in life, where you've actually got an insight because two systems are saying different things.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think one of the things is to understand in an organisation is actually whether an organisation has one position that it takes. I think what was talked about earlier is saying, with data, actually from the same piece of data, people will actually get different perspectives. So actually, yes, you can have different data sources that will give different positions. I think you need to be aware and be careful of what you're doing. If actually ostensibly you're looking for the same answer and you've got two answers, two responses, that's wrong. But actually you can be looking for subtly different things, and therefore you actually use different data sets in order to answer it, and they may come from different sources. Yeah.
I think also for very large, very complex organisations, if you're trying to get this one global version of the truth, you're actually potentially tackling something that's too big. So your risk of failure in that case could actually be far higher than you'd anticipate. So tackling smaller areas, understanding better before you then start bringing things together, would be a better approach.
Yeah, no, I've seen a few things where actually the process of getting single views taken out of detail. So somebody tries to resolve all conflicts on the way up.
Yeah, you can get to a point where what you're trying to do is you're dealing with deeply ingrained views and perceptions of different parts of the business. Well, we call it this and we call it this, and actually trying to get them to change, they just won't go. You've got many years of built up knowledge, and positions taken over here and exactly different ones over here, and how do you bring them together? Because you're challenging everything that sits inside those people in the way they describe it. And it's funny, I was looking at a program last night, and it was a couple of chefs that tour around the place in a Macca's Citron van, and they'd gone into a local show, and they'd entered a pie competition. Now what they'd done to them, a pie actually had a pastry base, and then you put fruit on top. Well, no, the part of the country they went into, a pie had a pastry top. I think whatever it was, tart pie, whatever. But the point was, the language that was actually used in that part, that was their description, and it didn't match what the chefs did that came from somewhere else. So actually the language was different, and you weren't going to change the judge. I think they were disqualified. It's all quite amusing. But the point is in there is you've got different values and different beliefs in different parts of the business, and actually that is very difficult to get those brought together, and putting a computer system is not going to fix it.
Okay, more questions?
Doesn't that have to do with the context, content, and strategy with all the processes to work your way back? It's like you first need to define the context where you're operating in.
Yes.
And then break down to the content that you really want to see, just to like reduce the ambiguity and all the stuff. All this kind of like corroborating.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you understand what it is you're asking for. If you understand that if you're somewhere in the Lake District or wherever they were, and it's called a tart, and somewhere else calls it a pie, you have to understand there are two descriptions for it, and understand the audience that you're working with, and actually how they will understand and interpret the data that you're providing to them.
Yeah. More questions?
Yeah.
I'm a strong believer that BI projects don't suffer from budget to that extent, because they help in refining the business processes, and they go on to support the organization's decisions. Could you please justify how do budgeting impacts BI projects?
What I would say is, from my experience, is if you're going into a finance director and you've got a budget position, you're asking for money, you are asking on the basis that you may have an example somewhere else where somebody has provided extra value, but you're going in saying, give me this money, I will investigate the data, and then when I've investigated, I'm potentially going to tell you something that will provide value to your organisation. So it's a leap of faith. Now that's not to say that in some circumstances that it isn't justified. The example I used of the health and safety team, absolutely, they started running analytics against the data that they got in the incident reporting system, and they were able to produce trending information. So that, as an example, was something that absolutely, it wasn't expensive, it was localized and controlled, and they could start providing some value out of there. And we were discussing this beforehand, and I think there's an element on it. It depends what you're asking for. If you're asking for a large budget and you are going to solve a raft of problems, but actually it's going to be a long time from when you get your budget to when you start seeing results, that's when you suffer. If you can start in a more controlled manner and you can compartmentalise it and build incrementally, you are likely to see more results because you're building on success.
Exactly. So in the second instance, when you start believing the results and you start reaping the benefits, I think such budgets never suffer from budgeting.
Can I just say BI is a pie and it's a tart? So to answer your question, what we're focusing on here is the reporting elements, the dashboard elements of BI. In an organisation where BI means master data management, it means cloud, it means this, it means that, absolute failure because it's so eclectic and wide-reaching, you never actually get the focuses that deserved.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. I think, you know, you say that it never suffers from a budget. We look where we are now as a company. The bulk of our company is regulated. Actually, it's not the part of the company I work with. I work mainly with what we call our non-regulated businesses. But we've just come to an agreement with the regulator on a regulatory settlement, and that has cut the amount of operating expenditure that we've got. Now, we will look at that and say, where do we need to spend our money? How do we make sure we outperform the formula? How do we make sure we continue to provide shareholder value? And that very much will be concentrating on what are the perceived priorities. And that's where a lot of this comes in. What is the perception? If I go and see a finance director and I've got an MPV investment, or I've got what he potentially would see as a speculative BI, you know, data query investment, which one do you think they're going to go for? Yeah, they can understand the first. And there is a skill for us in terms of the way in which we present our investments to attempt to explain them in the language of the finance director and the financial approval committees. That's a core skill for us to be able to interpret that. But ultimately, if the budget doesn't exist, if we haven't got spare cash, we can't spend it.
Okay, so I'm going to say time for more questions, then we'll move into panel debate. So Tim, do you want to ask?
Okay, so two presentations which actually hit a lot of the same things. And if I can sort of paraphrase the first one, the vision was enterprise asset management, enterprise BI, but it was around working asset management, and tube lights is enough about working asset management to make that be pretty wide across the enterprise, whereas National Grid is, it has many different businesses, and it's fundamentally different. It has a different user invoicing and interface out to the commercial market. So you're proposing that you sort of get the same vision, but through data marts, possibly data marts built on commercial products, and then build up from there with further as they're justified. So the question is, if you had your 20 or 30 years again, what strategy would you put in place for BI?
What a lovely question. I could say it's impossible to answer after 20 to 30 years, Tim, so I can't answer it. I think to a large extent I'd actually answer it by going back to the illustration of tube lines. Is that was something that actually was business endorsed. It wasn't something that came from IS. It actually got business backing. Yes, it was very clear in terms of the perception of the benefits that they were going to get from it, but it was something that was actually driven top down into the organisation. It wasn't an IS technology initiative that actually came bottom up. So I think I would very much say, you know, if you use the example of the Information 2000, you know, we set about it from totally the wrong perspective. So absolutely, I would say go from the business position, don't go from IS. Andy?
So just to add one comment to just to support that, and it's not a knock on IT. We sit in the business, we're a separate group in IT, and with order development, we sit in the operational arm of the business. Now I know that sounds like we're still doing IT, we still are, we have developers, you know, have an integration specialist, mobile specialist, etc. team. But we have everybody has an empathy with the asset, so we have specialists in each of the areas too. So we designed a special team with the start that would enable this to happen, and we put it in the right place.
think that, you know, over my career, I've seen a change. You know, at one stage we used to argue about different types of boxes and colours of boxes and releases of Oracle and all sorts of technical stuff. And actually, that was the time when it was the right thing to do. You know, that was where we came from. You know, even before that, when we dealt with IBM and, you know, we bought the next upgrade, IBM decided that we ought to have. You know, so that the world has changed over those years. But actually, where we're sat working with the business, you know, where actually you've got somebody that understands what the assets are, you know, how to manage them, actually with people that then bridge into an understanding of data and information, that is far more valuable than all the years when we spent talking about boxes and tin and wires and various things. But that is an evolution that has come through, and that's where we now need to be. We can buy tin and wires and stuff. You know, there's enough people out there that provide those to us today. We don't need to concentrate on those in the way we once did. We can now provide much more value working with the business, you know, working with our colleagues, understanding how the business operates, and looking at the information that we can get from the data. And I won't go into defining the difference of information and data, let alone knowledge.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Derek. Thank you very much.